everybody, and welcome to None the Lesser. This is your host, Cody Buchanan. We are about to sit with Justin Pape, an artist I discovered some time ago when the world wasn't as wildly connected as it is now, and rediscovered within the last year. Originally finding him under the name We Kill You as a street artist, he has since delivered his talent onto the world of retail and hotel design, art galleries, breweries, music, and then some. We talk about all that and more, so let's just jump straight in. Awesome that you were willing to do this. We'll just start it out pretty simple with you telling everybody who it is you are and what it is you do.
My name is Justin Pape, and I'm an artist based in Toronto, Ontario, and my art is kind of all over the place these days. It's not specifically painting or digital or sculpture or photography. It's kind of everywhere depending on what the project or the idea is.
Awesome. So how are you doing over there in Toronto?
Honestly, other than the fact that the world is on fire, I thankfully haven't had any direct family members or friends that have been greatly affected by COVID, which is wonderful. But as far as being able to slow down, and up here we're very fortunate. As someone in my position, I'm self-employed. I have no work coming in right now. Mm-hmm. And since I believe it was March, we've been people in my position who don't have any work or are out of work because of the pandemic. The government had a sort of plan in place to help us out through these times. So we have been okay financially, and it's just lended time for myself and my partner who we work together to sort of experiment with new things and enjoy making food and doing things like that, listening to records, sitting on the patio.
Canada seems to be doing a pretty good job of handling things, especially comparatively speaking.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy because a lot of the news that I tend to see, I've tried recently to not seek out as much news, but I tend to get more American news than Canadian news, because there is so many different things going on down there every single day. Yeah. And it is I used to live in LA, and when I lived out there, I also lived over in Rhode Island. But when I lived out there, I was kind of in my own bubble doing art and whatnot, and didn't really watch the news or anything. Kept up to date with the stuff that anyone was kind of posting, and it was in my face, but I wasn't digging into things. And also, not being a citizen of the country, I didn't feel as invested in it in a way, I guess you could say. But yeah, everything that we're seeing up here is kind of like, majority of it seems shock thing. I've been trying to look at a lot of other world news because it's really, I don't know if disheartening is the word, but to only see the negative things that are coming out of one specific place, to try and see, well, right now there's a lot of negative all over the world, but
right.
But Canada seems to be doing pretty good comparatively to a lot of other places.
Yeah, I think as a US citizen, it's hard to feel like we're doing even remotely close to a good job. It's like there's a divide between parties, a divide between who believes in the pandemic and who doesn't, which is just all asinine to have to be a part of and keep witnessing. And I can totally understand why the Canadian news and anywhere really would be looking at America right now, because it's like, as much as the news is informative, it's also meant to entertain in kind of a twisted way, and everything that's going on here definitely contributes to that.
Yeah, it's almost like its own Netflix in a way that doesn't have the happy story at the end half the time, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And any friends that I do speak to down there have a same sort of feeling about everything that's going on, and it seems like there's kind of a, not a pause, but a we're kind of waiting for that election to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's like very similar to getting, test results back for something that you're terrified of getting. So
Right. Yeah, it's like that election day is looming like a hurricane on the horizon. It's like I just don't know what the outcome is, and I don't know what the results are from that outcome. So
yeah,
it's I don't know, weirdly frightening, I guess. There's still a lot of good going on in the world, but it's so hard to find it with all the bad, and that's what's difficult. But I mean, people are unifying over a lot of things right now, so that's good.
I think the fact that everyone on the planet basically had to press pause for a minute and had a bit of time to think rather than constantly running straight ahead,
Right.
was a very, very good thing. And we'll see in a year or two from now how much of it sticks. But right now, it seems like people's, I guess, morality or people's, their morals aren't getting pushed aside as easily as they might have before.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Yeah, totally. So I want to jump into some of your projects, and I'm sure we'll be talking about a lot of that stuff. But I think one of the big sells that came out when I discovered you again, because I mentioned when I reached out, I discovered you back in high school, which was like 2007 or 8, when you were working under the name We Kill You. So I discovered you under that name, and then I rediscovered you just because it was like a project I was interested in, and I remembered it like within the last year, and then I found out it was you, Justin Pape, behind it all. So that was really cool to actually get the name and then see all your new projects. But I thought was really cool was discovering that you were really invested in kind of reusing projects over the course of your time as an artist. What does that look like for you when you get into kind of like going for that no waste, low waste project approach?
So that as I look back, it kind of was always there. From it really. So one thing I noticed between growing up here in Toronto versus when I did live down in LA is that from as far back as I can remember, the like waste systems with recycling and organic waste and all this stuff was really like, it was just always very much a part of life. And there was no thinking about it of how stuff happened. Like it was a part of culture. It wasn't just garbage. And I didn't think about that until I did live in LA. And I noticed a lot of my friends just like throwing bottles in the garbage can because it would get sorted somewhere else or something like that. And it was a kind of like, oh, wow, this has been something that's been stuck on, like been a part of my life. Like I don't know any different in a way.
Right.
And So when I was growing up skateboarding, listening to punk music and stuff, I was very like DIY and uh, make things out of anything that was around. My friends and I used to make ramps out of any kind of garbage wood we could find, probably because we just didn't want to buy any wood or didn't have the money to. And the art then turned into the first real art project I was invested a lot of time in was We Kill You. That was based a lot around recycling, around finding things in the trash that were usable or a little bit broken. So, for example, maybe like an old IKEA table where one leg was broken off and someone threw it out. So I would pick it up out of the garbage and I would fix it and then paint it and do all the things, the We Kill You art stuff on it, and then put that either back where I found it or at a busier sort of intersection in downtown. Sometimes chain it up somewhere so it couldn't get removed as easily. But that started to evolve more into like making almost like little living rooms in places out of garbage furniture. And eventually, when I was having shows, I had one show in, was it San Francisco, where the entire show was made out of garbage, like things that I had found basically, and the toys that I was making at the time. But all the artwork was painted on found objects. As I got away from We Kill You, one of the reasons I kind of stopped doing toys and things like that was the waste of it, that it was plastic resin, it was highly toxic, and everything, no matter how careful you were, there is always a little bit of like extra that's going to get thrown out. And there was a lot of waste to it that I didn't really feel comfortable with. And I always said I'd maybe go back to that stuff if I could find a better way to sort of make the sculpture, the toys, sculptures, whatever you want to call them, like I was before, but not out of plastic. And time sort of went on. I moved around a lot and I ended up back in Toronto. And I started working for some companies doing art more on the side. I was doing art for the companies, but it wasn't like my personal art, so to say. And then about a year and a half ago, I went back to fully doing my own stuff. And at that time, my partner and I had been doing we had done one project for the Art Gallery of Ontario, which is like Toronto's MoCA, I guess. I don't know. In fact, we do have a MoCA, so never mind, that's not true. But it's a big art museum, and we had done a show event thing there. And the pieces we had made were all out of plexiglass and wood. And after the project ended, the two of us were kind of like, what the hell are we going to do with 13 plexiglass sculptures? Like, we can't fit them in our house. We can't fit them in the studio we had at the time. Like, this is incredibly wasteful to make these things that are all, amazing for one night, and then nobody cares about it the next day. So shortly after that, our next project came along, which we decided, you know what, we're only going to stick to using reusable and recycled materials going forward, or as eco-friendly as we can be. So yeah, the next project we did was fully made out of waste material. I think we only bought one. It was like, when you have flooring, and I think it's called like a step up or a runner or something. it, if there's flooring that meets in two rooms, it allows you to not sort of catch your foot on it.
Yeah.
So other than that one thing, we built this giant, 10 by 10 foot wooden sculpture that you could go inside. That was for uh, like a Save the Elephants Foundation. And the entire thing was made out of wood that was going to garbage, screws from past projects, flooring from a flooring company that was going to throw it out, and so on and so forth. And that became the sort of model going forward. That was about a year ago, where we like really cemented our foot down and saying like, this is how it's going to go forward. And still to this day, we're using pieces from those two projects to build projects going forward. And over this COVID time, we've really been able to push to experiment with sort of a next step. At the moment, we've been making sculptures that are very architecturally inspired, and the makeup of them is a mixture of construction waste and a material that's like a part plaster, part concrete mix. And so we've been finding construction debris, mostly bricks from buildings that are being torn down near where our studio is, and breaking that down into a powder or very small rocks, mixing that with the newer material, and then casting them in one-off molds that we make out of found insulation board, like the Pink Panther stuff. So fortunately, there's like, since COVID hit, there is every corner of this city is under construction. Like, there is so much construction going on, it's insane. But if you go talk to some of these sites, they have a ton of offcuts that we take the offcuts from the insulation boards, we take bricks, whatever it happens to be, and have been making these sculptures. And so far, our mixture is at least about a 50-50 mixture of waste versus new material. And I don't think it's, sometimes we've even put like, about 2 months ago, my hair was really long from not cutting it for months. So we shaved my head and kind of used the hair also almost like a, sometimes in casting and making sculptures, you'll put like fiberglass, almost hairs in it. So we've been trying things like that. But
how's that working for you?
I think it's more ends up being aesthetic than really holding it together. But at the end of the day, we're not building a structure that anyone lives in or anything like this. It's an art piece, and the long-term goal is, can we develop a material that can get done on a larger scale. But that would involve engineers and all that stuff. So for now, we're kind of in experimental stages with that. But again, with the foot down on it, everything has to be like, I think the big thing to come out of all this, as we were saying before with COVID and slowing down, was I've always had one foot in the door of being very like, all the clothes that I buy, all the things that I don't really buy plastics, and my clothes are made from certain places that I know what's happening, and so on and and the materials involved in it. And I've always been there, but then at the same time, you're running at full speed every day, and it's very easy to just say, I'll deal with it next time, and kind of put your morals aside, like I was saying before. But now we've kind of put our foot down and be like, no, this is how it's going to be going forward. Like, this is what matters to me. This is what I'm passionate about. And if somebody wants to work with myself or with my partner, with the two of us, that's a part of it going forward. There's no more like, just make us a cool plastic sculpture thing.
That is that with Nicole Charles?
Yeah.
Yeah. So your goal moving forward then is like a minimum 50% reused material, or?
Well, with those sculptures that we're doing, that happens to be that mixture that's working out for us, and we're trying to push it further. I just did one the other day that was much more of the brick, but it's a little too crumbly, so we're still figuring it out. But as far as like a larger project, yeah, we are trying to put, as if it can't be reused materials, then if we're building out of wood, then it has to at the very least be, certified wood that has a certain background. If we're using paints, they are water-based paints that are that have there's this up here, there's the paint company Benjamin Moore. I think it's down in the States too, I don't know. But up here there's this certification, a Canadian, it's like a quote unquote green certification for building materials, and that specific paint that we use happens to have it. So it's little things like that. If we can't if it can't go the full route of everything being reused and whatever, then we're working with the best materials that we can for that project. And we're continuing to learn as we go along.
Yeah, I saw that you reuse the screws, which you already mentioned. That's really cool that you would go all the way down to that, to making sure you're using screws.
Yeah, so we've had there have been things that we've built that we have had the option of screws versus like wood glue and pin nails or something like that. But yeah, the screws allow it to break down easily. And I mean, still some of the screws from a project we used, I don't know how long ago that was, 3-4 projects ago. I'm still using them, even if it's just to like quickly hold something together. But we try not to, unless it's like totally shredded, we'll use things as much as possible. And we've even done some, so lately we've been making like very simple furniture pieces for ourselves. I don't know if you can see in my background, but there's some like record shelving and stuff. But like benches, credenzas, things like that. And when some of the things that we've done, we've made the screws completely visible on purpose, just to sort of highlight that, and not in a, like, to say that it's there rather than try to hide it and do all the things for it. And I enjoy those bits of seeing the pieces that some of these things, you can't see them here, but you can see all the printing on them still from the factory of like where it was made and stuff like that. And I kind of like that rather than washing out things to the most like minimal, clean IKEA style look.
Yeah, doesn't sound like it's the goal, because it's part of the piece. It sounded like you were talking about Crystal Maze at the art gallery before with the acrylic.
Yeah.
How was that received when that show was opened?
Yeah, the night of the event, it had a good location, which was great. There were a couple of different artists, and from anything that we heard, people really, really loved it. Really took well to the simplistic look of it and the idea of it. Originally, our plan was to make it more like a maze, but just how the layout of the place and how the pieces came together in the end, it didn't work out in the same way. Kind of like a hedge maze was our original idea. But yeah, it was very well received, and it's become something that when we do talk to newer clients, it's something that comes up as, oh, we saw this of yours. I'm interested in doing something. It's been really great, really great.
You were also talking about Not on Our Planet with the tusk.
Yep. I guess I'm good at not saying names of things. They had seen, I can't remember if they had seen something of ours or how it came about, but there's not Saks, but that kind of a thing in Canada called Holt Renfrew. They partnered with that foundation to do a line of products and like a pop-up store and things like that. And so we created that piece, which was fully made out of, at that time, we didn't have a studio. And a friend of mine had a place that he allowed us to make everything in. And he had just done a project with some big project where he ended up with all this plywood that was going to go to the garbage. So we ended up cutting all the pieces that we made out of that plywood, along with all the ribs that hold the piece together, was all out of plywood. And if you look at it too, you can see some like graffiti that's on some of the pieces of the plywood, which is what is kind of left over from its old life. And that's something we've been trying to continue with going forward, is if it has little things like that, rather than covering it up, sort of keeping it there. So I don't know, the idea of just masking something so that it's perfect for exactly what you want to do when it still was great anyways. It's a strange concept to me, but
it gives it a lot more of a story with all that.
Yeah, for sure. And I love being able to see things like that and know where it came from, and know if I see that little bit again, like there's its third, fourth, fifth life, whatever it happens to be. But also the building, the way that went together and came apart, made for a 10 by 10 foot structure that you could go inside, and flooring and everything. We were able to take it down and put it in a friend's hatchback car. So it
wow.
was, so I for a while worked for a company where a lot of our work was with big hotel chains. And well, when working in the hotel room world, I was doing a lot of the like lobby and single kind of cooler pieces that weren't just framed art in the rooms. In that world, I learned to think backwards and start with like, how is this going to get taken down? In that world, it was more a child is going to climb on it and a drunk person is going to try and break it. So start at the beginning with those parameters and kind of work backwards, rather than like come up with an idea and then have to tweak the idea because later on you realize you have to break it down and fit it in a car or whatever the story is. So those sort of things play into everything that we make as well, of kind of thinking backwards from the end rather than having to compromise somewhere in the middle because you're set in your ways about how something should look, but didn't think about X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, I saw the hotel projects that you had. Sounds like that was a little more kind of rigid in the way you could do things then. You had to plan ahead and deal with different challenges.
Up to that point, all the art that I was doing was very specific, and maybe it was hyper detailed illustration, or it was the We Kill You stuff, or it was, skateboard related or something like that. And none of that exists in a sort of hotel setting. And learning to appreciate artwork as more of an interior design piece, just like a pillow would be. So the artwork is the same colors as the pillow, but it doesn't really say anything. But that's the point of it. It was a really eye-opening experience for me. Basically, we just did framed art, and I eventually came to them and said, I can make all this other stuff. Why don't we start to develop it in a way that, it's not just two-dimensional, maybe it's three-dimensional, and maybe it moves, or it's more sculptural, or so on and so forth. And it was a really good experience to be able to work with this in this world where everything that I traditionally up to that point thought of as like good looking, cool art was not good looking. It didn't exist in that world. Its place was somewhere else. And so it was like completely being thrown out of your element in a way, which was great.
I can imagine that it's pretty much like this is the design, so you fit into it, not go wild and crazy.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the hotels are like brands and they have brand standards. So let's say you own a Marriott Fairfield Inn hotel in Seattle. Maybe the colorway for Fairfield Inn is like a purple and pink and black colorway. And so, but it's in Seattle. So they want you to use, local photography from Seattle, but it has to be like digitally altered to fit within the parameters of the brand guidelines. So there's a lot of that, and a lot of very like gestural paint stroke artwork and things like that. But every once in a while, when a hotel had a bit more money and wanted to do something different, then we got to go kind of wild with it.
Cool that you were able to kind of get into more of that. I don't know if you would call it like a corporate art kind of style, and then like your own like kind of street style and your own gallery style.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's very, in my opinion, washed down, simple, like nothing that could possibly offend anyone, nothing that could, be thought of in any way other than there's a cool thing on the wall.
Right. When did you start? When did you get into art? I guess like as an origin, like how young were you when you determined that art was your thing? And then when did you decide like to fall into where you are now?
Back when I was lucky growing up, where I lived on a street that was like a dead end street. So you could there wasn't much traffic. You could play on the street and stuff. And a lot of the neighbors were friends, and there happened to be about 7 guys that were all roughly the same age. So we all grew up together almost like brothers. And our parents kind of would take turns of letting us do certain things. And a lot of that ended up being like building things. So skateboard ramps and like soapbox cars and these kind of things, just to kind of entertain the kids. And then the winter snowboard related things. And we were always involved in it. And as time went on, I started to do that on my own with skateboarding. And eventually I don't know what it was. I think like grade 10, 11, something like that. I had a group of friends and we had our like skateboard crew, and we started making skateboards. We would get pressed skateboards, but they weren't cut yet. So we would cut them into weird shapes and paint them and sell them. And at that time, I got into screen printing and had a little line of t-shirts that I would sell to like kids in my school and the school nearby. And at this time, I took art as like an elective class in school. Maybe it's around grade 10 or 11. My art teacher was like out of her mind, apparently she used to date someone in Pink Floyd back in the day. And she was just like this weird little old British lady. And she kind of let us do like whatever the hell you wanted.
That's like every art teacher.
Yeah.
Every art teacher is like crazy and has all the stories and just so relaxed.
Yeah. And she was like, go ahead, make art where like there's photocopies of your friend's head and there's like blood pouring out of it and whatever, I'll grade you on it, which was great in high school when you're like a skateboarding punk kid. And then she had suggested to me at some point, I think it was grade 12, when you're starting to think about your colleges and stuff. I had no idea what the hell I was going to do. And she told me, she's like, you should apply to OCAD, which is the Ontario College of Art. And she wrote me this letter saying, this is one of the best students I've ever had. You have to accept this kid. Like he doesn't know it, but he's going to be doing something. So I got into OCAD and it kind of picked up from there. And around that same time, like that last year of high school, first year university, a friend of mine had, his father owned a business up in like cottage country in Ontario. And beside the business, there was this, what they once used almost like a shed, like a giant shed, but they didn't use it anymore. And we turned it into a skateboard shop. So we like worked with distributors and we made our own clothing and all this other stuff. And we had that for 2 or 3 years. And that was like the first door into like properly producing t-shirts and things like that. And around that same time, I got into starting to do the We Kill You stuff and learning what wheat pasting was and street art and all that world. And then it just rolled out from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I was a huge fan of street art in high school, which again was like 2006 to 2010 for me.
Were you in Michigan?
Yeah, I was born and raised in Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, really small town, not far from where I'm at now, like an hour and a half west of me. And my friend and I, we just did not fit in. Our small group of friends didn't fit in. And I loved like the whole guerrilla art scene where like it was just all about like, you know, slapping stickers that you drew yourself or whatever. Just like, I loved like the Mark Echo stuff. And I played the Mark Echo's Getting Up game that came out.
I loved that game.
Yeah, that game was amazing. I don't care what anyone says. But that's when I discovered We Kill You too, was just like this fascination with this world. And like my buddy and I, we were getting like all these art books with like the collections of like different guerrilla artists and street artists. And you know, I was like, dude, check out this We Kill You. And we were like looking at all your stuff. From a book? No, not from a book. I found We Kill You online.
On like probably MySpace or something?
Yeah, MySpace. Like everyone thinks graffiti when they think street art. And like the whole wheat paste scene like never really got the cred that I thought it deserved, because I thought it was just like incredibly simple, but like obviously it takes time to design that stuff. So when I found We Kill You, it was like, dude, this stuff's so simple, but like it just plastered over everything. I loved that look so much.
It was interesting because I had no idea what any of that world was. I happened to have, near my house, there was a bridge where the highway was and a walking path through the forest under the highway, and all the pillars, the kids of the neighborhood would tag them with like stupid shit. And at our house, we had a photocopying machine. So I had drawn these characters one day while like sitting in bed, and I blew them up on the machine so that they were each the size of a piece of paper. And there were the 6 different characters, and they looked very like haggard compared to what they eventually looked like. I made a whole bunch of them, like until the machine didn't work anymore because I was a kid and I didn't think of the fact that my dad would have to deal with that at a later time. But I just made all these printouts, cut them all out by hand, and then somewhere, oh, it was from like paper mache. I remembered that you could make like a glue out of flour and water and sugar. And then I thought it would be funny if I went and covered up these shitty tags with these monsters that were kind of like laughing at it. I knew nothing about graffiti world and graffiti beef and all this crap that happens in that world that I still don't really care for. I like the art form of it and I understand it all, but the whole beef part of it is like, come on, you're grown-ups. But I just did it, and then I continued to do it, and eventually I started adding color to it to make it more bright, and it wasn't in a way to be like rebellious, like to get back at these other people who were doing things. It was just like I personally thought that the poorly done stuff that was there, it looked cool if there was something like bright and a little more refined there. So I continued to do that and it stayed up. And I think it got tagged over at times and whatever. Then I started doing it downtown and then I started doing it all these different places. And I then started to learn about, like, I knew what obey was through skateboarding, but I didn't know the whole wheat pasting sticker side of it. Then I learned about that and learned about other artists like Buff Monster and these other Wheat Fail and people like that. And sometime like 2006 to 2008, somewhere in there, I went to LA for the first time. And I have an aunt and an uncle there. And my uncle, I told him, like, this is this stuff that I just discovered. Can you take me to Hollywood and to Melrose Street and like, can we look for this stuff? And we drove around and we found all these things. And then that's when I like really started to realize, oh, it's like there's people everywhere doing this. I thought I was just like, these were the tools I had at my disposal to do something. And I didn't realize the like bigger picture that was a part of it. And then, yeah, it all started to pick up from there.
Yeah. When you said Melrose Street, is that like where you saw the wheat paste or the graffiti or just all of that?
Yeah. So Melrose had like, I don't know if it still does, but at that time it had like the Kid Robot store and like the cool shops like that, the like more street art stuff. So I went down there to go to Kid Robot and to go because I was collecting toys at that point. And yeah, that street happens to be, at least at that time, there was, I think Banksy had just been there. And I have like Polaroids that I took of like Banksy's and Space Invaders and all these, and Obey and Buff Monster and all these different art. That, who is that guy who, Mr. Brainwash, like all that stuff was happening on that street. And I'm sure it was happening everywhere else in the city, but I knew nothing about the city. I just knew that I wanted to go to these specific places because I had heard about them online.
It's got to be kind of a surreal, kind of eye-opening, like, whoa, this is like a whole world.
Yeah, because at that point too in Toronto, maybe there was other wheat pasting and things going on, but it wasn't something that was really on my radar, and I didn't know the people at that point. Eventually, I did meet people, but at that point, I only knew very, very good graffiti and the more scribbly, angry kid under my more suburbanized neighborhood graffiti.
So you realized or learned about the beef of that culture of like tagging over other people's stuff. Did you just like, did somebody say like, hey man, you don't want to do that? Or did you learn that the hard way?
I've never been into a fight or anything like that. And I have a lot of friends in that world, and mostly mural world nowadays. But did you ever hear about Toronto Mayor Rob Ford, who smoked crack?
Oh yeah. I think I heard about that.
So that guy was just a piece of work. And when he got elected, I can't remember if it was when he got elected or right like when the elections were about to happen. But he had this vendetta against street art, and this vendetta, like he wanted to paint over every piece of graffiti in the city, and he didn't want bike lanes, or he like there were all these things. It was kind of like hates on a thing and then a new thing comes up, and it was kind of like that.
Hates on all things good, basically.
Yeah. And so I had made these giant pastes of like a really fat cartoony version of him, and he was eating all these things that he hated, so like spray paint cans or bicycles or streetcars or whatever it happened to be, and put those around the city. And there was something that happened with him and the Prime Minister of Canada at that time, who was like very conservative Prime Minister. And I had made this big paste that was like the video game Rampage, where there was a building and they were punching out the windows of the building and eating. One of them was the lizard and one was the ape, and they were eating the people. And I did this big paste and it went over somebody. I don't know who he was. And right after that, I had gone to or moved to LA. I can't remember. But I had left the city, and somehow through, I think I put a video of it on YouTube or something. And whoever I went over, his friend contacted me and was like, yo, what's your fucking problem? Do you know that this is so and so? And I was like, I don't know who that is. And I didn't really do this because of that. It was just a building covered in, like, it was a derelict building. That's why I put it there.
Yeah.
And he was like, if you ever show your face here, put your stuff up again, we're going over you, and the whole beef thing. And I was like, okay, like, I'm sorry. I didn't understand that that's what that was, but I never really did big pieces like that again because time sort of changed. But to my knowledge, I haven't gone over someone since that point.
Yeah. Are those pieces like the one of him eating like the bus and stuff? Are those like photographs somewhere like people can see that?
I have photos on a hard drive. I used to put everything on Flickr. So it's possible they're somewhere on Flickr, but there's videos of those that I have, and I think they might be on my online. I'll track them down and send them to you. It was kind of just fun one-off things that I was doing at the time.
Is the wheat paste stuff like easy to clean up off the walls? It's got to be easier than graffiti, right?
Oh, 100%, because either I was using like really cheap photocopy paper that would come apart really easily if you wanted it to, or if I was doing one of these bigger pieces and I was hand painting it, it was a very thin like roll of paper. I'm guessing it was highly recycled because of how it felt. I was always making my glue out of water, sugar, and flour. If I ever got in trouble, it was like spray it with a hose and all you have left are a few bits of paper. It wasn't, like graffiti where you need a special cleaning service in order to get it off your wall.
Or repaint it, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think I remember the original meaning behind the name, but could you explain the meaning behind We Kill You, the name?
The name came from, I don't know, I must have been watching something, but the idea is like, you're killing me, like with laughter. Like when someone's laughing so hard, they're like, oh my God, you're killing me. So that was the idea behind it. And all the characters, even though they have sharp teeth, they're kind of like laughing and having fun. I didn't realize it at the time, but kind of looking back at it, that a lot of that wheat paste world was very political in a sense. A lot of the artists were doing more political or um, things like that, at least the ones that I followed. And I didn't really care to get into that side of things, but to make something that was like my entire goal of it was someone who just had a shitty day is walking home from work and they see it and they crack a smile. Up until I started making toys, and then they all had their own world and things going on with it. But the street art was just like bright colors, simple patterns, like way too many of these monsters in one place. And it was kind of like a fun overload sort of thing to hopefully make someone laugh.
Yeah. I remember having some of your stuff up and my mom seeing it and saw like the "We Kill You," like it said "We Kill You," and she's like, "What are you looking at? You trying to kill someone?" And I'm like, "No, Mom, let me explain."
Yeah, there was a time when I was thinking of turning it into a kids line, and then I would have to change the name if I did that. It would probably just be WKY and then change the K to something else. But yeah, I realized I think if you look at the later stuff that I was doing, I tried to just put WKY eventually, because I think as things in the world were changing at the time that I was doing it, and I just didn't want to be using the word kill, and I was not really like into the idea of shock value. And I think that at times it was getting that. It was like coming off more as like wearing a t-shirt that says fuck you. And I mean, I even made shirts that said "Your face sucks," which at that time I thought it was funny, but then eventually I was like, oh, you know what? It's not just me or the person wearing it. It's the other 7 billion people surrounding you that might not find it the best thing. And yeah, I didn't want to do that with that company. I've done that kind of stuff with bands and other things who that's their platform. But eventually with "We Kill You," I was like, yeah, maybe I don't want the word kill anymore.
Yeah. And you did the toys for that too. They kind of became collectibles. Did those I think I saw you made like somewhere around 1,000 of them.
Yeah, so that all started with I was collecting back to going to LA and Kid Robot and stuff. I was into Kid Robot and Dunnies and those kinds of like collectible toys. In Toronto, sometime I want to say it was like 2008 or 7 or something. We had this giant nightclub that was like multi-floor nightclub. And one of the floors, Kid Robot, like had a bar on this floor. So every floor and every room was like sponsored by a different company, and they could make like even the bathroom was a bar. It was really weird. And so Kid Robot had this bar, and I was asked to make a custom toy for this bar because the whole thing was like these giant toys and toys on conveyor belts and things. And at the opening, I met the guy who had started Kid Robot, and he gave me all his information and said, send me some designs and we can look into making a dunny. And as I was designing trying to come up with a design, I didn't like anything that I was doing because I was constrained to that platform, the specific shape of this toy. And there were a couple guys at the time that I had seen online who were making their own toys. And so I was like, okay, maybe I can try this and let's see if I can make my own and what would happen. So I watched YouTube videos on making molds and casting and stuff like that. And then I made one. And at that time, there were a lot of message boards for the collectors that were into that stuff. So I put them up on there and they sold. And then I made more and a couple more characters. I started to notice people from China and Japan and around the States and all these different places that were into it as I started to build it up a little more and a little more. And there was a period of time before the recession where like my sole income was making toys, which was pretty crazy. But yeah, they were all hand cast, hand painted. Packaging was all done by me. Everything was custom done. And there's still a big community for guys that do that and girls that do that. But yeah, there was at least 1,000 of them. And now I only have one of each different character. Like I don't like to keep tons of stuff. So, but I kept one of each one of them in the original, like sculpted that you make the mold from.
That's really cool. Yeah, I saw those. I guess probably a little too late. How much were you selling those for a piece?
It depended. I think the average was probably like $50 or something like that. Oh, cool. I think it depended on if they were one-off custom ones, how big they were. Like for each one, usually when I made a new character, I would do a run, which would be like 10 or 20 or whatever of the same one, and then a couple custom ones. So the run would be like $50, and then the custom ones might be like $75 or something. I don't know. I don't know the exact numbers right now, but it was something like that. And yeah, each character had a backstory, and there were kind of like good guys and bad guys, and there was a whole world that there was a time when I was thinking, oh, I could make this into like a comic book, or I never got around to it.
Yeah, I was reading about it. It's very interesting, the level of detail beyond the art that goes into it. And I think that's probably part of that world, the toy making world.
With the We Kill You toys specifically, when I was growing up, we had a lot of cartoons that were environmental cartoons, like Captain Planet, and we had one called The Smoggies. I don't know if that was in the States, but it was like the Smoggies were a family that lived on a boat that just continually put oil and garbage into the ocean. And there's an island right nearby, and the people who lived on that island, they were always fighting each other. And then there was one, I think, called The Raccoons or something like that. And anyways, there were all these environmental shows. So We Kill You kind of influenced from all that. Was like there was these good guys, which tended to be the ones that had that distinct face on it. And they were kind of like the protectors of the forest and the water and the cities and the whatever. And then there were like this gang of dudes that tended to have multiple eyes. And they would do whatever they wanted to do, to like any kind of destruction or whatever, to just, make money. It was kind of a good and bad environmental based idea, but it only ever existed in the descriptions of each thing and never really made it to a bigger picture.
Could probably use those guys right now in our world. The good guys. We have plenty of the bad. Yeah, we had Captain Planet here, but not those other ones that you were mentioning. No, those cartoons.
One thing that I learned when I moved down to LA was that all the guys that I lived with there were all, for the most part, they were all born and raised in California. I had a couple friends who were from the East Coast of the States. And so when I lived there, I also played in a band. And we went on this one tour, and we'd be in the van listening to music, and I'd be like, oh, put this song on. And they'd put it on, and I'd be like, oh, so good. Remember this song? And they're like, I have no clue what this is. And I would go through all these songs being like, this was like the biggest song in the 90s. How do you not know this? Only to realize later that Canada, on the radio and the TV, so we had our own version of MTV, which is called Much Music. And there's a broadcasting law that a minimum requirement of 30% of content has to be Canadian. So there was all this stuff that was the top 40 biggest whatever, but I didn't realize that it was only in Canada and sometimes only in Ontario. And so, and it was interesting too, because in Toronto growing up, a lot of our channels came from Buffalo. So there was this mixture of American and Canadian stuff, and sometimes you wouldn't know what the difference was. So yeah, I guess we had all these shows that I only know must have been Canadian because nobody who was American knew what the hell they are.
Yeah, and on our honeymoon, we realized that the TV was like different in Canada. Obviously, like with all the streaming services and like Spotify and everything, everyone's pretty connected on a lot of those fronts now. But like, you still have like even the national television is different. Like, we have our own. My wife loves the Bachelor show. We have our own Bachelor, and apparently Canada has their own Bachelor, which was pretty surprising to us.
Yeah, we have tons of shows, and we have all these like home network type shows. And there's this amazing show that used to be on that was that style of show called Canada's Worst Handyman. And basically, it was like a bunch of people would like vote their uncle or their husband onto this show because they're like, he thinks he's an amazing handyman, but he's terrible. And then the whole show is like these terrible people at building stuff have to build a house. And they're like, there's always the one guy who gets frustrated and duct tapes everything together. And I think like the winner of the show, I can't remember if it's like you were the absolute worst and so you win the show, or if it was you passed enough tests. But yeah, there were a lot of those kind of fun, weird, stupid shows that I'm sure there's some kind of American equivalent, but yeah.
I've never heard of anything like that in America. That sounds like a really funny show.
Yeah, it was really good.
Obviously, I don't want to hang on the We Kill You too much, because you're beyond that now. It seems like you've kind of laid that to rest as a project and moved on.
Yeah, for every once in a while it pops up, or something happens where I take a picture of it, or somebody's like kid requests something of it, and so I paint them a picture or something like that. But for the most part, I don't really do it anymore. But anytime I do it, people are like, bring it back, do some more stuff with it. So I haven't like put a gravestone on it, but it's kind of sitting there and it's collecting dust at the moment. So I don't know if it'll come back. I have thought though, with the sculptures that we've been developing with the newer recycled materials, once we do pin down like a great mixture that we do like using, I might scale up one of the characters and try and cast it in that material and see how that goes over. Because my main reason for stopping making the toys was the material that it was made of. So if I could do it in a material that was more environmentally friendly and had more of a meaning behind it than just, a cool looking plastic, then I think I'd be down to give it another shot. Maybe not call it, it would probably be more sculptural than anything else. But
looking on your website, your projects obviously span a lot of mediums and even like different levels of complexity. You find some items that are pretty simple. Obviously, a lot of thought goes into it and how you're going to execute it, but simple compared to some of your other items where it's more complex and a lot of layers involved with it. Do you find that you enjoy one end of that spectrum more than the other in terms of simplicity?
If I'm left to do something on my own, it tends to be a lot going on and very, maybe not illustrative, but more chaotic, I guess is the word in a way. But when Nicole and I started working together, her art practice couldn't be more different than mine in the sense that it's extremely minimal. Like her actual paintings are very minimal and very abstract and very just so different than the world of stuff that I was doing. So when we started to work together, I would be like, let's build this thing and it has a stuff sticking out of it and it's purple and green and pink and da da da. And she would be like, yeah, but you can say all that with just this one thing. I would end up making her do something maybe a little more complex than she would have done on her own. And she would make me do something less complex than I would have done on my own. And it's become this really great partnership of give and take in a way. But yeah, I don't think, I don't mind if something is like totally off the wall with a million pieces and so on, if there's a purpose for that. And if it needs to be very complex. But then I also have especially over the past couple of years, I've gained a lot more of an understanding and respect for like what simplicity can say in something. And some things too, some of the very simple looking things are incredibly hard to make compared to something that looks very complex.
Yeah, I guess simple is probably not the best word. Minimal would probably be more accurate because there's an art to minimal art. It's not as simple as somebody taking a block of wood and slapping it in front of you and saying, this is my art.
Yeah. I mean, I think people do that. And
yeah,
I tend to believe that people can see through that kind of bullshit. But yeah, I'm trying to think of a project that like, for example, the crystal maze thing, looking at them, it is very simplistic. They're very like single shape of plexiglass, same size containing box underneath it, and they're all lit up. But inside that box, there's a structure that holds the plexiglass at a certain height with like a shelf almost inside it where a lighting system goes into that so that the lights are in the exact place it needs to be to shine through the plexiglass. And so there's this whole, like, it was harder for us to fully figure out how that was going to happen than me like drawing a crazy illustration that looks like it would have taken me 20 years to make or whatever the hell it happens to be. I don't know.
I think it's all really cool. I mean, both ends of the spectrum, really cool to see where you started and where you've gotten to. Not that I've followed you along the way. It was more of just like a kind of like a lapse in time for me. Like I said, rediscovering you and seeing where you're at now. And you mentioned earlier that you worked for Indigo, but you worked there as like a team member for the company, and then eventually you did an art deal with them.
Yeah, so it's like it's a hard store to explain to someone in the States because it up front it's kind of like as if Barnes and Noble was to mix with like a cool department store. So at its core, it's a bookstore, but it has all these other products and other things going on. So it's a like $1 billion company. They have stores all across the country. There's one store in the States in New Jersey, but I was pulled on to the team when we started redesigning the insides of the stores. So to make them less of a, like the stores were kind of transitioning from being like a bookstore to more of a department-y store in a sense. And they call it a lifestyle store. And so as we were redesigning it, my boss had known me from the past and known some of the hotel stuff that I was doing and thought, why don't you come on and the store has all these different sections. So there's like a kids section and a like cooking section and a wellness section and all these different things. So we had to design pieces of art for all those sections. And for some of the bigger stores, it was just as any large, big store in store would do, where you can kind of get away with doing some really beautiful and cool things. And some of the stuff we got to do there, like giant lenticular pieces that on one of our stores was like, I don't know, 20 by something, like it was massive. And this is a piece that as you walk by it, the image changes depending on how you look at it. There were interactive pieces that would, you could move them and they would form different images. There were, there's like one of the stores has a giant 40-foot mobile that hangs above the escalator. And so it was kind of insane to have a company that had a budget, a boss who trusted that if I said I knew how to do it, it would get done, even if I didn't know how to do it. And then I formed a partnership with a fabricator who could do these things. So I could be like, hey, do you think we could make like a giant spinning so-and-so that does this? And he'd be like, yeah, I think so. And then we wouldn't know if it actually worked until we were installing it in the store. But yeah, it was amazing to be like, oh, you want to build this thing that's going to cost thousands of dollars and it's your executed idea? Go ahead. I was really fortunate, and it was a great experience. And the only reason I'm not still working with the company is as time moved on, like a year ago, and when Nicole and I decided we were going to do our own thing, the store had sort of done its renovations, so the need for those kind of art pieces and whatnot wasn't there anymore. So my role kind of shifted within the company.
I would imagine you learned a lot going from the hotels to that style.
Yeah, I learned a lot. It was like an amazing job with amazing people and great pay and everything. Yeah, I came out of both of those things with a lot of knowledge to not only the amount of work that can go into something, like certain ideas that we had done, but also more of an understanding of costs and things like that. So now that when we talk to clients, we can say like, well, you want this, here are all the steps that are involved, here are the people we're going to need to get in to do that, this is a rough estimate, like all these things, as most things are with experience and with time of doing stuff. But those two jobs in particular were like two worlds that if you had told me I was going to be doing them, there's no way, would have ever thought that I would be doing that. They're not something that were like ever in my plan or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I think the artist's path is one that's really hard to like predict and define, and especially when you get into something like that, it's got to be pretty surprising.
Yeah, I think at a really early age, and even maybe it started to develop more after We Kill You stuff, but I think there is value in artists that have a very specific style, and specific style that like you look at it and you know it's them. The problem with that is if you're the guy who paints pink skulls and in a year from now nobody gives a shit about pink skulls and you've built your entire career on this one specific thing, what do? One, I never wanted to be in that position, and two, I love discovering things and I love the like puzzle aspect of building things and not knowing what the hell I'm doing and figuring it out, that I could never really just stick at one specific thing. I've
Yeah.
also had this mentality too of like the second something kind of is getting like people are liking it, I want to try something different. And I don't know if that's like an attitude thing or something. Like, for example, one of the musicians that I work with, Amigo the Devil, for a while, I don't know how many years, probably 8 years, we were doing a very specific style. And when it came to a new album, we were talking and we just like everyone loved this certain look, but kind of because of that, I wanted to be like, no, look, it can be something else. You're still going to love it.
Yeah.
So we did something very opposite to what we were used to doing, which I love. And again, when the next album comes up, we're going to do the same thing because that's how I like to work.
I saw that Amigo the Devil. That's the Everything is Fine.
Yeah.
Is that the most recent one?
That one was 2018, I believe.
Okay.
So it's the first like official full length record. And prior to that, there were a bunch of EPs that we then turned into an album. That album I felt was like, again, for that artist, was like taking a step way over, trying something a little different in their world and really knocking it out of the park.
I think that package for Everything is Fine, and even the volume 1, the compilation of those EPs, like those are both just like some of the nicest looking packages and vinyls I've seen lately. Everything is Fine is like the gatefold, and then you've got the triple gatefold with volume 1, right?
Yeah, so there were two versions of that. There was the one that you can actually still purchase is the triple gatefold one. When the last of the EPs that is on that came out, he wasn't on a record label, so we just made those records ourselves. We started our own label, which under that name we've put out a record, a CD of Amigo, and I've put out some photo books and or zines. And I'm actually bringing that label back now with some books and records and things. But that first version of it, where it looks like a book and it had a newspaper and it had all these little matchbook and all these different things that pertain to different songs in the album. That was a really, really great project. And the Everything is Fine one was like, went down to his house in Texas for a weekend. We shot a bunch of pictures, shot video, had fun. That stuff that's in it is just the result of us having sort of a weekend. It wasn't fully planned how anything was going to look in the end. And we were just using whatever we had on hand. The front image on that cover is actually his partner is up on a cliff holding a flashlight on him in this water that we were in, like a creek. That photograph was actually the test photo. It wasn't supposed to be the photo, but every photo, we shot 200 photos after that, and every single one was either blurry or didn't work. Like something went wrong. So it was one of those times where it was just like, okay, this is kind of go with your gut and do the first thing that you do. So
that cover of that is really, again, that minimal look. It's exactly all you need to know. It's Amigo the Devil, which I did listen to the album once so far. I got to listen to it again, and his voice is just amazing. But
yeah, and when shows start happening again, when bands can tour, he is a live act that anyone I've ever taken to the show, or his fan base is insane. They're incredibly dedicated to him, and the live shows they're not like the album because it's just him. There's no band. And so he either for a song plays banjo or acoustic guitar and sings. but the way that he holds an audience, it's just, you should look up some live videos online, because I've never, I've seen so many shows in my life, but I've never seen or felt the experience that he's able to sort of garner and pull together. It's pretty incredible.
I haven't seen the live shows online yet, but I know from what I've read on him that the live show is definitely captivating. I can imagine with his vocal talent, especially.
Yeah.
With the music, I mean, you've done more than just Amigo the Devil. Do you, when you design those packages, is it like everything that goes into it, you are kind of all the creative direction, including like the color of the vinyl and the artwork, or how does that work?
For the most part, yes. Not all of the things that I've worked on, the artwork is mine. Like, there was a band called Ume that I did a package for and a vinyl for, and they wanted to work with this collage artist. So we did all the artwork on the album with that. So that one I was more doing the design. I had designed the logo that we were going to use for that album, and all the layout and how things went together and stuff like that. And I can't remember if I chose the color for that record or if they did. But then another person who I've been working with quite a bit lately is a girl out of Berlin called Bestial Mouths. It's like a industrial gothic electronic thing, and she has a very strange voice, in a good way strange, but when you hear it, you'll understand why I say strange. All the art that we've done for her has been based off of videos that she's done, because she, for her albums, shoots, I don't know, ridiculous amounts of videos, and they're all very strange.
Fits the theme.
Yeah, when she's shooting videos, there's photographers there and whatever else. So we use a lot of the imagery from that so that it all ties in together one in the end. But yeah, then with her, I'm picking vinyl colors with her, and the whole process goes like, it's a back and forth between me and the artist or band or whoever it happens to be. Music is, outside of art, is the next biggest passion in my life.
Yeah, I could definitely see the influence in that too. You have your business, Colony Collapse. I mean, I've looked around, I can't find it. Is it under a certain name online, or does it have a website?
So that's the label that we were doing the first Amigo the Devil record under. I made some photo zines, one of my own, one of a friend of mine. So there's only been 4 or 5 releases under that. Over COVID, I've been thinking a lot more about it. I have a lot of friends right now who are photographers and artists and musicians that I would love to put stuff out. And I recently met a girl here online, met this girl who has a lathe cutting machine for records. So she can produce incredibly low runs. Because when we're making an album, you can't really do under 100 if it's going to be, either a plant won't do it or it just will cost way too much money. I'm going to bring Colony Collapse back, not as a record label, not as a book company, but just as like a company that does one of the first releases we're planning to do. A friend of mine who's a photographer is going to take photos of the sculptures that we're developing right now. I don't know what his idea is, like if they're in nature, if they're in a certain place, or what the story is. But he's going to photograph those. We want to make a book of it, and then we want to record an ambient 7-inch that you listen to as the soundtrack while you read the book. I've been talking to another friend of mine who's recently made 1-minute songs that we might turn into like a 10-song 7-inch, and all these things too. So let's say that there is an album. For the most part, albums are always put in a shelving unit, unless you're someone who puts the artwork in a frame on your wall. There isn't really any other way to display it. So I'm trying to take an approach of making either an art object, like a sculpture that the record somehow fits inside of. So you have this sculpture on your shelf, on your table, or whatever, and it's working as a piece of art. But if you want to hear the music that's contained within it, you can do that as well. Like, it's going fully to the collector side. I'm trying to do things that have a bit more going on. And then on top of all of that is it all is, again, going to be using materials that are as eco-friendly as I can get them. I've been talking about what's the best way to do records, because vinyl isn't the most eco-friendly thing, but there are ways to get records done that are recycling old records or recycling old pellets and things like that. How we do the books will be one thing, how any sculptures are made. It's more a collectible item than it is just a book or just a record, which is kind of funny because whenever there is an actual record that is done like that, like a picture disc record that is cut in a weird shape and it's collectible, I fucking hate it. Like I want nothing to do with that stuff. Yet I'm trying to make maybe something in my brain a step above that. I don't know.
Yeah. Why do you not like those?
I just find it like things that are like purposely gimmicky in a way. A lot of the time, the music that's on those things is also on a normal, not strange record. Things like with Record Store Day, where a band puts out a 7-inch that's in the shape of a lightning bolt or whatever the hell it is. And it's like $40 for this thing with this one track on it. But that track also exists on multiple other platforms of like a 12-inch vinyl or another 7-inch vinyl or whatever. I've just never been into it. What I hear from people who are much more in the audiophile side of it, that whole world of like the really gimmicky record stuff just sounds terrible.
Yeah, they're selling more of an aesthetic than the actual music,
which is what I'm trying to do.
That sounds really cool, though. I'm going to keep an eye out for that, because that sounds like a nice project, and I love I don't have many vinyls, but I love collecting vinyls. So anything with a little more to it. Where you're at now it's all art. You don't have like a day job. You said you were self-employed.
Yeah. So for a little while, I mean, every once in a while before the pandemic happened, I and Nicole as well were working on commercial sets, like TV commercials, like IKEA commercials or whatever. It would be their long hours building sets. The people are awesome, but I have made the decision not to go back to that world if I'm not like in dire need of the money, because the waste in that world is unbelievable. With IKEA, for example, we would do commercials where we would basically build like 5 or 6 rooms, like everything, walls, tables, windows, whatever it happened to be, over a period of 5 days. They shoot the video, the commercial in a day or two, and then it all goes in the trash.
Wow.
I mean, anyone who's put together IKEA stuff knows you can't take it apart and use it again. So you would have to go and buy the stuff from IKEA and return what was possible after. Like, it was just, at the end of the day, it was like so much stuff, let alone the amount of, things like water bottles and whatever goes on set. Just the actual structures themselves, it was just like, because of the speed of everything, it was build it, break it down, throw it out, get on to the next thing.
Yeah.
And it's morally, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position right now where I can make the choice to base my job and stuff on and not have to sacrifice my morals, I guess.
Yeah, the waste in that just in general with consumerist like lifestyle, it's just terrible.
You're making all this crap to throw it in the garbage, to make a video, to sell people crap they probably don't need, that they're going to throw in the garbage. It was just like, it becomes
Yeah.
a vicious cycle.
Cool.
Other than that, it's been our own art projects and different clients that we've worked with.
I guess if you could, what kind of advice would you give yourself earlier on, maybe even before you got into the art?
This could just be what I see, but this, like, everything has to be perfectly thought out and done, and this illusion that everything is perfect, just like the way anyone sort of puts on their mask on Instagram of how great their life is. Everything that I do has come from failure and fucking up. That's just as important, if not more, than the succeeding part. Because a big example is every single painting that I do, or every single piece of art that I do, I hate it until it's done. Like today, I was at the studio working on something, a painting, and it's in a style that I have never done before. And I have a reference of what I want it to look like, and it doesn't look exactly like it yet. I'm like, well, it's garbage, done. I can't do it anymore. And there's a past version of me that was like, that's where I would stop. And pushing through it, knowing that maybe it ends up being garbage, that's still okay. Getting to the end and knowing that you made it through it, whether or not it's good or not, is the, like, that's the whole part of it. The struggle in the middle is the joy of the end result. Because looking back at it, like, you're going to remember that you were like freezing cold and standing on a ladder and a pigeon was shitting on you while you were doing this thing, but all anyone ever sees is like the beautiful part of it. I think it's maybe don't be so hard on yourself.
I guess, yeah. I mean, don't like overthink the project and don't give up on it, because in the end, you know, you're going to be proud of the result or remember everything that led up to that result.
Yeah, and I think failure is really, really important. I think that 90% of what I've done has been because I experimented doing something. It didn't work out one way. It did work out another way. So I pushed it a little further and built on that, and then watched the YouTube video. And then, you know, you get to your end results, and failure is very important.
I think a lot of people struggle with that too, because they like you said, they see the perfect life that people are living in Facebook and Instagram, and they're like, oh, I put my head to this thing, this talent that I wish I had for one day, and I didn't have what they have. And it's like, no, it takes a lot of time to master those things.
I mean, another annoying thing about that idea is that you do get clients who don't understand that part of it. And if you're doing, say, a logo, it may take you 50 times of drawing something before you get to the one that you're happy with. And but if you don't accept that, like, there is this whole process of 49 failures before you get to the right thing, and you think that because the first one didn't work out, it's never going to work out, then I don't know, it's going to be really hard to get anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, what have you been, or lately, what have you been consuming, whether it be like reading, art, music, or anything in general?
I've been reading more recently because I have more time to read, and I've been consuming a lot of magazine based work. Like there's one magazine called Apartamento, which I read pretty much every morning. I managed to get a bunch of the back issues because it's been going on for 10, 15 years. And each issue is just interviews with creative people in their houses, which is, and it's done in a way that usually I've felt magazine interviews are like, what is it you do? How do you use this paint? And they're like this sort of cut and dry that in the past hasn't interested me as much. Like it wasn't like a conversation, whereas this magazine works more like a conversation.
Yeah.
There's another magazine I found recently called Atmos, which is very new. I think it's only a year or so old. It focuses on culture and climate. It kind of feels like it's a super high-end fashion magazine, but the focus is all on sustainability and people pioneering ways of growing foods and things like that. It's really beautiful and interesting and well written.
I think I saw you share some of their stuff on Instagram.
Yeah, it's a really nice magazine with some cool features in it. And I think both of those, you can read a lot of the stuff online as well if you don't have access to the actual physical magazine. And then there's two books that I was reading a lot over the pandemic that I have that are, one's called Why Materials Matter, and the other one's called Radical Matter. They look sort of like design books, focusing on people and materials that people are building to like substitute materials. For example, there's a guy in there who's using offcuts of leather that are being compressed into almost like pieces of wood that he's making furniture out of. There's some really interesting stuff in it. One of them is someone making almost like plastic materials out of blood.
Whoa, that's pretty metal.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they made a blood record, which probably sounds like shit, but if you put like grindcore on it, it wouldn't matter anyways.
Yeah. I think I saw somebody, I don't know what the band was, but I did see a vinyl that they put one of the members' blood in the vinyl. It might have been that one, but
yeah, they've done like Jack White's company developed a record that you could press liquid inside of, and then they made a Friday the 13th record that has like fake blood in it. But this one's actually somehow they're drying the blood, I'm imagining, and turning it into a compound that is plastic like that they press. As far as watching, there's a website called Nowness, and they have a series called In Residence, and it's almost like a visual version of Apartamento in a way. Like it's like a documentary style in people's homes, and I think it's a lot more architectural focused though, like how the house was built rather than the person themselves that lives inside the house.
Are these like people of interest, or is it more so the place they inhabit? That's interesting.
Yeah, and it tends to be that they go hand in hand. One of the houses was this woman who's an artist, and she lives in a house that in England was inhabited for many years by this guy they called the Mole Man, because he was like digging under his house and they didn't know if the house was going to collapse. And it was kind of condemned, but she got the house and got an architect to build it back, but not get rid of all these weird caves and things this guy had built, which was pretty interesting. But in that situation, it was as much the architect as it was the artist who was living in the house that made it come to life. There's a movie I saw recently called I'm No Longer Here, which is a Mexican movie about this style of music called cumbia, which was popular at one point, but only kind of exists in this one town in Mexico, Monterrey. And it's about these like kids that are 20s, I think, who like their whole life revolves around this music and how it ties in with
the gang culture there. It's not a documentary, it's actually a movie, but it's a really, really great movie. And then a documentary I saw recently was called Shrikers, about a woman in a tropical Asian country. It was one of the best documentaries I've seen in a while. It's super fun, weird, like twists. It's awesome.
That sounds very interesting.
Yeah. My favorite album that I've heard this year is a girl named Agnes Obel, and she has an album called Myopia, which is it's really calm and weird and kind of Bjorky in a way. I don't know how to describe it.
Yeah, I love Agnes Obel. Her sound is hard to describe, you're right, but it's very interesting to sit with for sure.
Yeah, I've been listening to it a lot, like just when I go on like a night walk with my dog. It's like perfect music for that setting. Dark ambient, almost weird. Some guys who eventually became friends of mine out of Chile have a band called Adelaida, and they put out an album this year. If you were into like 90s, like bands like Dinosaur Jr. and that kind of thing, it's that world.
Mm-hmm.
Like a little more maybe shoegazy sounds, but it sounds like 90s alternative music. It's great.
And that's Animita?
Yeah.
By Adelaida. Okay.
So that's kind of where I've been at this past half year. I don't even know how much time has passed. And
I know. It does keep changing, but it feels like sometimes no time has passed and sometimes way too much time has passed.
Exactly.
Well, that's all. Yeah, that's all really cool. That sounds like some pretty interesting like reads to jump into if you're looking for like stuff that kind of deals in design but like interviews with people behind it.
Yeah, it's all I find it incredibly interesting.
Well, that's a lot of stuff to check out, and it all sounds really interesting. So I know I'll be jumping in for sure.
Yeah, and I'll send along a list of it.
Cool. All right. So where can people find you? You got your Instagram and your website. Anywhere else?
Those are the main. Actually, they're pretty much the only things nowadays. I used to have Facebook, but I don't have that anymore. My website, I'll put the like more detailed, expanded version of a lot of the stuff that I put on Instagram. It's mostly selected projects. Yeah, I don't have any other spaces. Instagram, I post lots of dumb videos of my dog too, if that's your thing. But yeah, those are the two spots.
Okay, great. I'll be sure to put a link in the description for that.
Thank you for hitting me up, and however I ended up falling back into your world after We Kill You stuff.
No, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. I love doing this with people because there's so much more behind the art and the music and whatever it is we're talking about. And I think there's a lot of insight to be taken away from that. So I appreciate you taking the time tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep in touch and, maybe do an update down the road.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll send you over some links of some of the things that I mentioned.
Awesome. Well, thank you, man. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you for listening to my chat with Justin Pape. You should be curious about his work, and I made it easy because there are links in the description to help you find all of that. So many cool things were covered and some sound advice. There isn't anyone out there that's perfect, despite what social media tells you. Everyone is using those platforms as a method of showing off the best aspects of their life. It's so important that we recognize that the perfect life you see and broadcast on social media is not real. Don't fall into that delusion. And of course, don't give up on the project you're facing because of its challenges. You're going to get through it, and it will mean that much more when you get it done. Nothing's perfect. Face those hurdles, and failure is important. I've got a bonus episode about street art and its history on the way. And the following week, we'll have Cosmo D on, a indie developer and musician who has made some of the most inspiring video games I've played in recent times, and some even more incredible music. So I'm excited to have him on here. We had a great conversation, so I can't wait to share that with you. Be sure to tune in for that and more. But thanks for listening to this episode. Do follow Justin Pape. Do follow Nonethelesser. We're on Instagram. We're everywhere. Subscribe. Leave a review. Reviews are important. It makes great things happen. So do that. This has been Cody Buchanan. I'll see you next time.